4:14 through 30. And the title of the message this morning is Hear This. Hear This. Now, have you ever had anyone that said something to just make you mad?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah? Yeah? How do you react when somebody says something that makes you mad? There's many ways that we can do stuff to make people mad. We can ignore somebody. I mean, that makes me mad when I'm being ignored, right? We can say something that to discuss someone, say something about someone. That can anger someone, right? Or sometimes we could just say something that's not thought through. That can anger someone. Or sometimes we can just say the truth, and that angers someone. But how do you deal with anger? Some people just get really quiet. They just aren't going to engage in conversation. They just shut down. Some people, they give you that furious glare, like, Rrr. And then I know a lot of guys, not that it's healthy, they need to find healthier ways, but they punch stuff, right? They just punch a pillow or something. You're, a little outburst or whatever. You just punch something. We react in different ways. Have you ever got angry, not specifically like at what somebody said to you, but at a sermon? Like somebody was preaching a sermon, not me obviously, but somebody else, right? Have you ever, somebody's been preaching a sermon, you get angry, it affects you? Well, today we're going to talk about a sermon that was preached that the people got so angry they wanted to kill. They got upset. And my question for you is, if you had been there, would you have acted any differently? Let's look at this. Luke 4:14 through 16 says, "And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and a report about him went out through all the surrounding country. And he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all." Just leave it right there for a second. It says that in these first two verses, it says that he went out and that he went and he was performing miracles. He was doing all this work. He started his ministry in Galilee, but now Luke does not pick up right there. He just makes a comment about it. Luke's going to pick up with this sermon here in just a second. But he says this, and he says it importantly because all throughout Luke, we're going to see that Jesus is filled with this, and then as we go into Acts, we see that exact same comments made about the church, that he was filled with the Spirit. He was full of the Spirit. And that's pretty important because Jesus has just come from the moment of his temptation in the wilderness, and he comes back and he's full of the Spirit. And all throughout his ministry, you're just going to hear this phrase over and over again, that Jesus, being full of the Spirit, then goes and does this. And he's full of the Spirit. So he's out and he's in Galilee and he's performing these miracles. He's doing these amazing things, and word about him goes out, and now he returns home. 16 says, "And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read." Now, there's a little bit to unpack right there, because here's the thing. He comes back home. Homeboy comes home. He's been doing all these amazing things. He's become famous, and they all know about him, but he comes home, and as was his custom. Now, if you read that real quick, it seems like it's saying, as was his custom, that he stood up to read in the synagogue. That's not what his custom was. As was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, comma. There's a pause right there. As was the custom of him and his family, they would have went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and then he stood up to read. So there's some things to unpack here, because Luke's audience would have understood a lot of value right there. They would have understood some things in their culture right there that maybe we don't unpack when we're reading something like this. But as was his custom, he went to the synagogue. Now, what happens at the synagogue? On the Sabbath day. It's the same ritual every day, every Sabbath. It's the same thing that happens. And so Luke's audience would have understood that, whereas we might just take it for granted and just jump to what Jesus read. But it's the same thing. So like if we come into church and somebody's like, well, what do you do at Reliance? First of all, we're going to make it a priority to show up. Secondly, though, when we get to Reliance, right? You come in and we sing worship. Synagogue's no different. They would have chose one of the Psalms, and they would have started out their service with one of the Psalms, and they would have sung it. And then, and this is pretty important, because we're going to do this today, then every single service, they would have started out with the Shema. Okay? The Shema is a reading, it's a prayer in Judaism. It's been around before Christ, it's been around since they had the law. And it's something that anybody, any practicing Jewish person that practices Judaism, they do it twice a day. It's pretty important. But they definitely do it on the Sabbath. And this is how it would have started out. They would have started out with a song, and then they would have moved into the Shema. And the Shema starts off in Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. There's 3 separate verses. There's 3 separate passages that the Shema is taken from. It starts off in Deuteronomy 6, 4, 9. It says, "Hear, O Israel." Now, this is why it's called the Shema. Shema literally is the Hebrew word for hear. And that word right there, "Hear, O Israel," is like with a megaphone. Listen to me. This is important. Stab this. Engrave this upon your heart. Don't let this leave your mind. This is something that I want you to carry with you. It goes on and even says, the Lord even goes on and tells them this very thing. But hear, O Israel. Hear this. Hear this. Listen to it intently. Take it into your hearts, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. It says, hear this and speak this, do this, repeat this when you lie down and when you rise up. Twice a day. You should be at least repeating this twice a day. You should burn this on your doorpost. This should be very center of your thinking, the frontlets of your eyes. This should be engraved on your heart. This is something that's important, and you need to know this, and you should be teaching your children this. And then they take from another passage in Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21. And it says, if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love your God, the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain to your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then in the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord has given you. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul. Listen, does any of this sound familiar? God's given them a directive. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall teach them to your children, talking to them when you are sitting in your house, and when you are walking by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, that your days and by the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, and give them as long as the heavens are above the earth. The first part of it in Deuteronomy is the Lord and only the Lord is God. Second part is that if you follow his commandments, then you will draw close to the Lord and you will be taken care of. And then the last part, Numbers 15:37 through 41, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Every single service, there would have been a song of worship, and then these passages would be said out loud. Every single service. Twice a day in their life, these very words would be burned into their hearts. Every day. And it's pretty important because when Luke sets aside and says, as was his custom, this is part of his custom, this is part of his upbringing, this is part of the story, that every single day that God was made center in the conversation, in their life, in everything. But as we're about to find out, because if we just look at it from when Jesus spoke, because Jesus is going to be reading from Isaiah, but if we look at just that, then we're going to miss an important part of what was going on, because Jesus is going to address this very factor of making God first in your life and everything. But I think, as happens with all of us, that sometimes we hear something important and either we give it a different meaning, we gloss over it, or it just becomes so repetitive that we don't really think about the meaning. I think that's probably some things that are at fault in our life and that was at fault in this audience. Something happened recently, and I don't know if this type of thing's happened to you or not. But I mishear lyrics in songs. And when I do, in my head and out loud, if you'll never have the pleasure of hearing me sing, but if I am only with my wife, who has married me for better or worse, if you hear me sing some of these songs, then you'll realize, oh, he doesn't know the lyrics to the songs, right? Doesn't know. One came to fruition not too long ago. If you grew up around the same time that I did, then on the radio, you would have been inundated with John Cougar Mellencamp. Mellencamp played all the time, right? From Pink Houses to, oh my goodness, Jack and Diane to everything. Mellencamp was on the radio all the time. But also, during this time, it seemed like, anyway, everybody was writing about cars. Everybody. It didn't matter who you were. You know, it could have Prince, Little Red Corvette. It could have been, you know, it didn't matter who it was. There was cars in almost all the songs. And so for me, when I heard songs, I don't know why, but I just thought that there was one song by John Cougar Mellencamp that was about a car. People named cars, Black Betty, all kinds of songs where they were naming cars and everything. And in the song, and I'm not singing it to you, but the lyrics I thought went, I find a Dorothy and a Dorothy always wins. Okay, that's what I thought all my life. I thought that was the song, right? And as a young kid, I just come out grinning, right? I didn't know. And listen, we're talking about 35, 40 years of me thinking that this is the song. I didn't know till this last year, until somebody said the name of the song was the Authority song. And I said, the Authority? What does that have to do with anything? And then I realized, oh, he's saying I fight authority and authority always wins. But I just assumed for like 35 years that this was about a car that he had named Dorothy, and that car always won. You know, like it didn't matter. It always won, you know. And so sometimes you mistake things or you don't think through things. I assume that's what was going on in the audience with Christ. So they would have started off with a Song of Psalms. They would have went through the Shema. They would have read, and then someone would have read from the law. Now the law would be anything from Genesis to Deuteronomy, right? They would have read just a passage from the law. And then honor would have been given to somebody to get up and read from the prophets and to give a lesson, a sermon. And that's how the synagogue order would have went. So at some point here, Jesus and his family would have went to the synagogue. They would have went through this order. Somebody would have read the law. And then Jesus bestowed upon him this honor because he had been doing all these amazing things in Galilee and everything. He comes home. He's Joseph's son. He's from the area. He's here at our synagogue. He's been doing amazing things. We can't wait. He's been bestowed the honor to read from the prophets. And it says in Luke 4:17 through 22, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent to me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll and he gave it back to the attendant and sat down, and the eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Today, the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Now, I want to go back to the Shema, right? The meaning of it is to hear this. Hear, O Israel. There would have been extreme significance that Jesus just read from the prophets and say, this has been fulfilled within your hearing. Hear this. Do you know what Jesus is saying right there? This prophecy from Isaiah is about the Redeemer. It's about the Messiah returning. And they knew that. They knew exactly what this prophet was. This prophecy was about. That he would come and that he would restore and that he would proclaim the good news to the poor, to the captives, to everyone. They knew that. And do you know what their response was? Would you assume that it was bad? Because their response was, and all spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. And they said, is not this Joseph's son? Is not this the boy that grew up in our area to the carpenter who hasn't been trained? Is that not him that's doing all these good things? No, they weren't upset. They were amazed. Is this not Joseph's son? How marvelous. They weren't upset yet. They weren't upset at his claim that he was the Redeemer. They weren't upset of his claim that he was the Messiah. They don't get upset until just a moment. Because Jesus was saying in this scripture that I have come to free the captives. He says the year of favor, this is what Isaiah is talking about, the year of favor is upon us. He's talking about the year of Jubilee. Now, in those times, it was custom that every 50 years, the year of Jubilee would come along. And every 50 years, all debts would be canceled. I really wished we still had year of Jubilee, right? All debts canceled. Anybody that was enslaved or had sold themselves into slavery, because that was a thing. They would sell themselves into slavery to provide for their family. But in the year of Jubilee, all of that was undone. It was canceled. It was to show that God was in control and that God's favor was shining upon them, and that God's ultimate goal for all of mankind was to be free of captivity of all kinds. And so it was custom. And Jesus said that when the Redeemer comes, and I am fulfilling this within your hearing, it's been fulfilled at this moment when I read this, that when the Redeemer is here, that the Lord's favor will be here. That I am here to release all from captivity. Cool. This is awesome. He's amazing. That's That's Joseph's son. We know him. Luke 4:23-30 says, and he said to them, doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well. And he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown, but in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. When they heard these things, all the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up, and they drove him out of town, and they brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they could throw him down the cliff, but passing through their midst, he went away. They were astonished when he said, I have fulfilled this, that I'm the Redeemer. They were upset when he started looking into their hearts. Because they encountered two problems. The first problem was the me problem. Jesus looked at them and he said, here's what's going on. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine with me being the Messiah, as long as I come here and benefit you. Because you're looking around and you're thinking, okay, well, he's done all of this in Galilee. How much more is he going to do for us in his hometown? How much more is this going to be about me? And it ain't just them. All of us have a me problem. From the moment we're born, we have a me problem. We go and we're born and we wake up and we start crying and our need is met. And we learn from that moment on that there is a way for our needs to be met. No matter what it is. We learn, though, because it's about me. And we have good parents, we have bad parents. They set up their own systems. It doesn't matter what those systems are. I cry, I get what I want. I learn crying doesn't work, so if I say things politely, I get what I want. If I do this, I get what I want, and it's about me getting what I want. All throughout life, I go to school. Why do I get good grades? Why do I get good grades? Why do I even care about grades? Because I want to get into the school that I want. Right? I want recognition. What does it matter if you graduate with a C or an A in college? It matters a lot if you're going on in your education. But if you're not going on in your education, right? It's about awards. It's about me. Why do I work so hard? So I can make more money, so I can move up the ladder. But everything that I do, it comes back to me. And not all of those things are bad. That's not a slap against everybody. That's just how we are conditioned. Do you know why people get big bucks in counseling and psychiatry? Do you know what they say? Because I can make big bucks. I just don't have the degrees to pass it up. You just have to learn how to see through their perspective. Right? That's the conversations, because all we think about is us. You go through couple counseling, all they're going to do is like, you need to start thinking like your wife. I don't think like my wife. I think like me, because life's about me. Right? The challenge is not to be about me. That's what was happening here. Everything was about them. They're sitting there and they're okay with Jesus even proclaiming to be Messiah, which they will not be later on, but they're okay with that as long as there's a benefit to them. And we're no better We're no better. We, and I'm talking in general terms, but we still go to God with our petitions like He is the wish granter. So it's all about us. We want God to answer our prayers, to provide for us, to heal us, to guide us, and everything else because it's about us. We show up in church and we only want to go to the church where the music pleases us, where the sermon feeds us, where there is things that take care of us. And we will bounce if it don't. Well, here's an awakening. Our reward is not those things. It's not those things. Our reward, we don't get to come to God expecting Him to give us rewards, His blessing, His fulfillment, His peace. Our reward is God. Amen. That's what our reward is. And that's what they were missing out on. They were like, okay, you are gone and done all of this in Galilee. What are you doing for us? Because that's what we're waiting for. We weren't even listening when you were reading from Isaiah. We're not really paying attention to what you said afterward. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What miracles are about to rain down on us? What prosperity is going to come our way? He's a homeboy. He can take care of us. And then Jesus upset them because He said, that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes. He said, you know what? You respect the prophets, so let me read from your own works. Let me read from what you respect. In Elijah's day, God used Elijah to go to the widow. There were a lot of widows, Jesus said. But God sent them to one in the midst of this famine. And He used that widow to point others towards God because our reward is God. In Elijah's day, there were a lot of lepers. There were a lot of people dealing with leprosy. But God sent Elisha to one, Naaman. And He used this miracle to point others to God because God is the goal, not the miracle. And they were like, well, that's not what we wanted to hear. It's not what we wanted to hear at all. I love this passage in Genesis 15:1. It says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield and your exceedingly great reward. God's our reward. He is. Our reward is not the things that we make it, and they're nice. They're nice. And I told you at the beginning of this message, that we're praying for our church. We know. We have stopped using the word COVID around here because I hate the word COVID, right? Almost as much as I hate Omicron. But we know that it sounds like some transformer disease, right? But that doesn't matter. All right, but we know that sickness has been running through our church. We do. It's not a comfortable thing to stand up here and have to be behind the mic and sing to a couple of people. It's not comfortable to stand up here and preach to a couple of people when there could be more people in the room. It's uncomfortable at times to do some of the things that we do. Would it be nice? Would it be nice if there were a lot of people in the room? Yeah, and you know what? It'd be even more nicer if all of those people were in the same walk of life as me, so that afterwards we could talk about all the things that I like. That would be awesome, right? I would love that. That would be cool, and they would understand some of the things that I'm going through. They all happen to be nursing instructors. I don't know how they would be, but my wife could talk to all of them. They could go, oh, this is what we do during the week. It would be so cool, right? Because that would be very comfortable. All those things could be really great. And if we could, because this is what I like. I grew up in the 80s, hair bands, baby. If we could get Dave up here on electric guitars that are spinning round and round and the lights are shooting through and we got lights just blazing through Heath and Amber's hair and they're all up here and they're jamming out on electric guitars, that'd be great. It's not my reward. It's not necessary. But we go through our lives as if that's what we're looking for. And we miss the point that our reward is God. So if none of that comes and I'm doing what God wants, that's all I need. Because that's where the reward's at. Your purpose is found in God and your fulfillment is found in Him. The primary goal of the church is not to make people comfortable in their life. The primary goal of our church is to point them towards God's kingdom. And when Jesus said His words that it wasn't going to be about them, they got upset. Second problem that they had with what Jesus said was that when He was sharing those stories, it wasn't about them at all. Both the widow and the leper were Gentiles. It wasn't even about Jewish people at all that God was using, that Jesus had pointed out. And He was pointing out to them that God was expanding His reach, that He was going to be leading them into areas they didn't want to go. And that's my second point, that God's leading will all too often take us to where we do not want to go. His mission is for all, and sometimes that's broader than we can imagine. It's broader than we acknowledge. It takes us out of our comfort zones. It's scarier than we want. There's a passage that Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy, and I wanted to read this. In 2 Timothy 1, 5 through 8, he says, I am reminded of your sincere faith, the faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you, through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me, His prisoner, but share in the suffering for the gospel by the power of God. Paul is writing this. He's penning this to Timothy, and he's encouraging him because Timothy is scared. He's scared. He's scared of a lot of things. He's scared that maybe by being a witness to God like that Paul has been, that he might be in prison like Paul is. And Paul's saying, don't be afraid. He's scared of some of the people that he might have to approach. Timothy's scared because he's younger than most people in his position and his young age. Timothy's scared of quite a few things. And Paul's saying, do not let fear, do not let going outside of your comfort zone, do not let these things discourage you. Fan into the flame this gift that God's given you, right? Step outside your comfort zone, because God's all too often leading us into areas that we do not want to go, that we do not feel comfortable with. He wants us to get out of our comfort zones socially. We talked about this in life group the other night. There are people in our lives, there are people around us that it's not our first go-to, right? It's not our first go-to to talk to them. And it may never be our go-to. It may not even be a calling on our lives, but it's also something that we don't shut a door on without going to God. Funny as it may be, I was trying to think of personalities, people types that I just would not go up to, right? And I was thinking, when we were having the group discussion, people were naming out stuff, and I was thinking, well, if I was to name a type of person I wouldn't go up to, and it's funny because that would be uncomfortable for me not to go up to, it wouldn't be prisoners. It wouldn't be poor, homeless people. I can do that. I love sports, and this is going to sound so funny. It would be harder for me to walk up to somebody, and it wouldn't be as hard for some of you, but it would be harder for me to walk up to someone at a tailgate party. You know, like where they're all around and they all seem like they're having a good time together and the music's playing and everything. For me to find a way to converse with them would seem unnatural to me. And I love sports. I know that there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but it would be outside of my comfort zone. It really wouldn't. But God sometimes leads us outside of our comfort zone, socially, economically. Are we willing to go there? I think that I have found that the people that I'm around anyway, it's not the idea of missions that we're against in the church. We're not. I find that most of the times when we talk about doing things for other people or sharing the gospel with other people, that most people are like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to be doing. You know, they can quote the Great Commission to me. They can go to Acts 1:8 and say, yeah, we're supposed to go out and tell others about Jesus. In Jerusalem, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. We believe that. We can quote that, and we believe that. We acknowledge that. It's not a problem. We don't have a problem with missions itself until it leads to somewhere we don't want to go. That's when we have a problem with it. And Jesus was telling them, not only am I the Redeemer, not only am I the Messiah, but this is going to be the path, and it's going to be all-inclusive. And if you're going to be a part of this, then it's going to be for the Gentiles, it's going to be for you, it's going to be in ways that you're not going to like. And it angered them. It angered them because it was no longer the way they thought it was supposed to be. It wasn't about them, and they were going to have to do things that they didn't like. They were so upset that they wanted to kill Jesus. They took him to a hill to throw him off a cliff. And the way that this is written is miraculous, but he just kind of slipped through the crowd. Now, it may not sound miraculous, but if you think about it, it's pretty miraculous, right? Like there's been many people running from the law that just kind of wish that they had this little gift. Like if everybody's looking for you, just slip through the crowd. No, you can't just slip through the crowd. They all want you. They know what you look like. You were standing out in the middle of the synagogue just a minute ago. Got your picture really clearly in my mind. No, it was a miraculous thing that Jesus was able to just slip through the crowd and be gone. But they were so angry at the thought that it wasn't about them. They were so angry at the thought that it would have to be about other people that they wanted to kill Jesus. Today, it's really distracting. Today, as we are focused on a church, on being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, right? As our campaign is going out to love on our neighbors, today, are you willing, before you leave church, at home, before you sign off, to leave a part of you and replace that with Christ? Are you willing to commit to kingdom work and a willingness to allow God to push against your boundaries? Because that was the challenge. Are you any different than them? That's what I started off with, the question. Would you react to Christ's message if you were there any differently than they did? Are you willing? This morning I'm going to ask Heath if he'll come up. And only you can answer that question. Willing to make less of you and more of Christ. That's basically it. To make God first in your life. To follow His commandments and His commandments to represent Him, to go out into the world, to make disciples of all men. Are you willing to make that a priority in your life?